Good evening everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy. We have been discussing important topics for mains examination from science and technology portion, and today we are going to discuss some important topics, particularly the genome sequencing, gene cloning, and also the GM crops. So these are important topics, and if you if you look into the previous year questions from science and technology in general studies paper 3, so you very often observe questions on genetically modified crops or GM crops, right? Because this is a very important issue, and similarly genome sequencing and gene cloning are also the other very important issues which have been gaining a lot of attention in recent times. So therefore we will try to understand what is genome sequencing, what is GM crops, what are those GM crops, and how GM crops are different from the normal crops, and why there is a long debate about the genetically modified crops, and what are the disadvantages of those crops. And we will also understand what exactly is the genome cloning, right? Now firstly we'll talk about the genome sequencing, right? So genome sequencing, before understanding that this genome sequencing, so recently we very often heard about this Genome India project, right? So this is the project so that has been commissioned by the Department of Biotechnology. So it has been funded and coordinated by the Department of Biotechnology, and in fact the Genome India project has recently announced that it has actually finished sequencing 10,000 Indian genomes. So that means it has successfully sequenced at least 10,000 Indian genomes, and that is going to have important insights with respect to the diagnosis of diseases and medicine and vaccination. So all these different applications that genome sequencing would actually have. And when we talk about genome sequencing, every human being or every organism on this planet has a certain genetic structure, and we human beings also have a genetic structure. And it is very important to understand the genetic structure, because sometimes mutations takes place within the genetic structure, and those mutations would lead to the genetic disorders among the human beings. And most of the genetic disorders that they are occurring, they are very difficult to treat, and they are also sometimes difficult to diagnose as well. So in this backdrop, genome sequencing is a method that is being used to find out treatment for those genetic disorders. And also there are some genetic mutations as well, right? So these genetic mutations can also be understood in a detailed manner, and a proper analysis can be done, and that would also have applications in drug design, drug manufacturing, vaccine manufacturing. So all these different applications it is having, right? So firstly we'll try to understand what exactly is genome sequencing. As I have already told you that every human being has a certain genetic structure, right? So in fact genome sequencing actually means that determining the complete DNA sequence, right? So DNA looks like this, right? So this is a double helical structure DNA, and within DNA there are nucleotides as well. So here what actually happens in genome sequencing, it will be the DNA sequence, right? So determining the complete DNA sequence of an organism's genome, right? For example, imagine that this is a human being's genome. So this is human genome. So as part of this genome sequencing, what we actually do in genome sequencing, we determine complete DNA sequence. So we determine, we understand, we analyze complete DNA sequence of a human genome, and that is what is called as genome sequencing. And this genome sequencing, if we go further deep into the details of genome sequencing, so it actually involves analyzing and also decoding the order of nucleotide bases, right? So what is the exact order of the nucleotide bases in a genome, right? So that is what is called as genome sequencing. Because so when we understand the order of nucleotide bases in a human genome, so it will enable us to study the genetic variations that are taking place in human genome, and it will also help us understand genetic disorders and new diseases, and also understand the complexities of organisms' genetic makeup. So this is not without any applications, because it is having important applications in the field of medical science. So in the field of medical science, it is having important applications, right? So keeping this in mind, genome sequencing has been acquiring a lot of importance in recent times, right? So you can see here what is the aim of genome mapping project, right? So the aim of genome mapping project is developing new therapies and diseases. So for example, there is a genetic disorder or any other disease, right? So those diseases, certain therapies would be developed, right? Developing therapies such as cancer and other rare ones. So this is one objective of doing genome sequencing, right? So this is a very important objective of doing genome sequencing. And second important aim of genome sequencing is a predictive diagnosis and precision medicine. So what exactly is precision medicine? For example, a human being is infected with a certain disease. So to that particular disease, instead of using generic medicine, a precise medicine would be used, and that precise medicine would attack the pathogen that causes this disease or address the root of this particular disease. So therefore, the genome sequencing would also help in precision medicine, and it would also result in the diagnosis of new diseases as well. So therefore, these two are the other major important applications of genome sequencing. Now, why Department of Biotechnology has financed the Genome India project? Because it is having important applications in the field of medical science, and that is why the Department of Biotechnology is interested in the genome sequencing. So in genome sequencing, we will understand and also decode the nucleotide bases that are located in the DNA structure, right? And in fact, 10,000 number of Indians whose genomic data will be categorized or cataloged in phase 1 of the Genome India project. So I hope you have understood what exactly is genome sequencing. So genome sequencing is essentially understanding the nucleotide base pairs in the DNA. So that is what is called as genome sequencing. Now, what are the important applications of genome sequencing? So we'll try to understand the important applications of genome sequencing. So firstly, we have discussed that genome sequencing has important applications in the field of medical science. In the field of medical science, it is having important applications. So what are the important applications within the medical science? For example, the data can be utilized for medical research and the diagnosis of new diseases, right? So there are certain genetic disorders, right? So there are certain genetic disorders, and the genome sequencing as a method and whatever data that we have generated through genome sequencing can be used to understand the genetic disorders, and the data can be used for the purpose of research and development, particularly in the sense that this data can be used for drug development, drug design. So for all these particular purpose, this genome sequencing data can be used. And in fact, there are are certain diseases which can be considered as a hereditary diseases which are passed on from one generation to the other generation. So most of these diseases are genetic in nature, and genome sequencing data can be utilized for the diagnosis of these hereditary diseases. So thereby we have a chance to understand the nature of these hereditary diseases, and we could also design, develop drugs which actually cure these hereditary diseases which are genetic in origin. And we already understood that the genome sequencing as a method can be used for the drug development also, because so whatever data that we have generated through the genome sequencing, we actually design and develop drugs, and therefore it is having important applications in the area of precision medicine. So in the area of precision medicine, whatever data that we have generated through genome sequencing can be effectively used. And this precision medicine can also result in targeted drug delivery, and we can actually optimize drug efficiency and personalized medicine, right? So personalized medicine can also be developed through this particular method. So therefore these are the new methods of drug development, drug design, and even administration of those drugs which are as of now not possible with a higher accuracy. However, if we have the data of genome sequencing, so that data would be effectively used for all these important applications, and that could actually revolutionize drug delivery and even the efficiency of the drugs as well. And in fact, genome sequencing is also having important applications in the area of agriculture as well, because genome sequencing as a method can actually help breed crops and breed livestock with a desirable traits. For example, we wanted certain desirable traits in animals, livestock, and we also wanted certain desirable traits in the plants. For example, in crops, for example, drought resistant crops, right? So we can produce the drought resistant crops, and even the salinity tolerant crops, drought resistant crops, and short duration crops. So all these different varieties of crops can be produced through the genome sequencing method. So therefore it is also having applications in the areas of agriculture plus animal husbandry as well. So when I say animal husbandry, so like how in human beings there are certain diseases, those diseases can be diagnosed and they can also be treated with increased drug delivery and increased efficiency of drugs. In a similar way, among animals also, the productivity of these animals can be substantially increased, and further their vulnerability to new diseases can also be substantially reduced. And even it is also having important applications in the area of evolutionary biology as well. So because the genome sequencing can actually provide insights into the evolution diversity of different species. For example, so when we are sequencing the genome of different organisms, so we can actually understand how mutations have takes place and how the organisms have evolved from throughout the ages. So therefore in evolutionary biology also, so this genome sequencing would have important applications. And even forensic also, this genome sequencing is as a method can be used, right? Because it can be used in forensic analysis such as identifying victims of crime and natural DNA, including all of its genes, and even disasters also. this forensic can be used. So therefore genome sequencing as a method can be used in the forensics as well. And bioengineering is another method. So in this bioengineering also genome sequencing as a method can be used. So what is this bioengineering? So this bioengineering is actually design and development of synthetic biological systems and even biomolecules. So these biomolecules and synthetic biological systems, they have the applications in the area of the medical sciences, right? So they have applications in the areas of medical sciences, and they also have applications in the areas of research and development within the areas of conducted by Department of Biotechnology. So in all these different areas, these biological systems and also biomolecules can be effectively used. So therefore the genome sequencing as a method will actually help design and development of such new synthetic biomolecule systems, or biomolecules or biological systems can be manufactured through the genome sequencing. And even environmental sciences is another very important area that has been evolving, and it is a dynamic area. And genome sequencing as a method can be used to identify the genes that are responsible for the degradation of the pollutants, right? So these are all the applications of the genome sequencing method. Now what are the major issues which are associated with genome sequencing? So there are certain issues which are identified with the genome sequencing method, right? For example, privacy is one major issue that is actually associated with the genome sequencing method, right? Because in fact in India also, in Puttaswamy judgment article 21 of the Indian Constitution, so Supreme Court has recognized right to privacy as part of article 21 of the Indian Constitution, right? So therefore with genome sequencing there are fears that the privacy of individuals would be violated, because genome sequencing actually involves the analysis of an individual's DNA. So individual's DNA would be analyzed, and that actually contains sensitive personal information, and this sensitive personal information can actually reveal additional information about health of individuals, their ancestry. So all these important details would be revealed, right? So therefore privacy is also compromised with the genome sequencing. So therefore this is also one major issue that is associated with genome sequencing. Secondly, the regulatory issues, because as of now there is no proper regulation that has been developed at the national level and at the international level also when it comes to the genome regulation. So there is no global collaboration, or there is no global a regulation or regulatory environment that has been well established, right? So within India also there is lack of standard regulatory framework. So lack of standard regulatory framework means that it actually limits the quality of the process, and it also leads to the potential misuse of data. So whatever data we have, so that data can be misused, and that data can also be hacked, and it also violates the privacy of the individuals. And at the same time, since there is a lack of a standard regulatory framework, so there is a possibility that the unethical practices can also be done through the data that is available. And in fact informed consent is also another major area, and that is also an issue which is associated with genetic sequencing, because there are a lot of challenges when it comes to obtaining informed consent from individuals, particularly in cases where sequencing is done, right? Because whenever the genome sequencing of an individual is being done, So the informed consent of the individual is very, very important. So informed consent must be acquired. And apart from that, the genetic discrimination is also another very important issue that is associated with the genetic sequencing, because so there are concerns that the genetic information about an individual that is being obtained through the genome sequencing. So once the genome sequencing is being done, once we understand the genome makeup or genome structure of a particular individual or a particular organism, right, so we have the genetic information about the individual. So the genetic information could be used to discriminate against individuals in various contexts, right, such as employment, insurance, and even education as well. So one example could be Hitler's belief in Aryan race, right? So Hitler believed that Aryans are a pure race, right? So it would also leads to the threats like racism, right, and potential discrimination is also another major issue that is associated with the genome sequencing. There are other major issues also, for example, financial constraints and technological challenges like cyber threats, unavailability of skilled manpower. So that could also hinder the effective usage of genome sequencing, right? So these are the major issues that are associated with genome sequencing. Remember that you need to mention all these different issues in your answer, and while mentioning these points, if possible, if you have any examples or relevant data, you should also mention those examples and relevant data, so that you can actually make your answer more and more appealing to the examiner, and there is also a possibility of you getting more marks as well. And what should be the way forward in this context? We have understood the larger implications or applications of the genome sequencing, and we have also understood the issues that are prevalent, the challenges of genome sequencing. So what should be the way forward, how we can actually move forward with respect to the genome sequencing? So for that, what we should actually do, we need to strengthen the privacy protection. So because we have understood that article 21 that protects individuals' right to privacy is violated with genome sequencing. So therefore we need to strengthen the privacy protections. For that, implement robust data privacy laws specifically for genetic information to ensure secure storage and sharing. And at the same time, we need to establish the ethical guidelines as well. So in order to establish ethical guidelines, develop clear ethical standards to prevent genetic discrimination and also ensure informed consent. And increased accessibility. So increased accessibility, particularly subsidized genome sequencing costs, integrate it into the public health systems to enhance the equitable access, right? So increasing accessibility is another very, very important area that we could actually work on to make genome sequencing more and more appealing. And enhanced interpretation tools. So for that, invest in advanced bioinformatics, healthcare professional training to improve data interpretation accuracy, and creating regulatory frameworks. So formulate comprehensive regulations addressing ethical, legal, and social implications of genome sequencing. So all these are the important applications of genome sequencing that we could actually work on to make genome sequencing more and more, whatever applications that we have with respect to genome sequencing. So those applications can be better used for the diagnosis of diseases, drug development, drug manufacturing, and efficient usage of those drugs as well, right? So in fact, these are some details with respect to the Genome India project that has been launched, right? So this is with respect to cataloging the genetic variations among Indians, right? So a national genome sequencing project to sequence 10,000 Indians, right? So a 10,000 Indians genome would be sequenced. And a disease gene identification, right? So this catalog will have all the genetic variations among Indians, and this will also help identify or understand the disease causing genes as well. And even capacity building and networking is also another very important area, because through the genome sequencing project we could actually train the manpower that could handle the larger data sets and other resources across institutions in India. And resources for larger and cheaper genetic studies is also another very important area, right? So whatever resources that we have generated through the genome sequencing project will help build arrays and also the new technologies for a large scale and cheaper genetic studies in India. And what are the genetic basis for the adverse effects and responses to the drugs? So we have understood that this genome sequencing project can be used for drug design and drug manufacturing, right? So when we have done the genome sequencing, so the genome sequencing data can be considered as a genetic basis for the adverse effects and responses to various drugs, right? So this study will actually help pave the way to understand why some people respond to some drugs, why some develop adverse reactions depending upon their genetic background, right? So you can go through this content about the Genome India project that has been commissioned by the Department of Biotechnology. And in fact, the government of India has launched some initiatives with respect to the genome sequencing project. For example, the Genome India project, that is a research initiative, so that sequenced 10,000 Indian individuals genetic structure. It has created a genetic map, and that will have a potential applications in the areas of medical sciences, drug design and drug development, right? So therefore it would have a comprehensive Indian reference genome, and this comprehensive Indian reference genome can be used for research and development, medical diagnosis, and understanding the hereditary diseases and finding out cures for those hereditary diseases as well. And in fact, the IndGen is another project that has been commissioned by Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in April 2019, right? So to conduct whole genome sequence of 1008 Indians, right? So this is IndGen project, and this is Genome India project, right? So I hope you have understood about this Genome India project, right? So next